They say when someone dies, their secrets die with them. Sometimes, those secrets are just waiting for the right heir. Welcome to a house tucked away in the Appalachian Mountains. A place I never knew existed, bound by rules I never asked for. My name is Elias Monroe, and I came here seeking answers about a mother who ran from her past. Instead, I found myself a prisoner in a house that remembers. What's the strangest thing you've ever inherited? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to step across this threshold with me, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because in this house, the silence isn't empty. It's listening. The inheritance begins. I always believed the dead were silent, that their stories ended with the final clinical closing of their eyes. My mother, a woman who had spent her life cultivating silence as if it were a shield, proved me wrong. Her death wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a story she'd spent her entire life running from. A story she had now willed to me. The lawyer's letter was cold and impersonal, informing me that I, Elias Monroe, a meticulous archivist of other people's medical tragedies, was the sole heir to a property I never knew existed. It was a secluded house, the letter stated, tucked deep in the Appalachian Mountains of western North Carolina, belonging to a grandmother I had been told died before I was born. The inheritance felt like a posthumous confession, a final cryptic message from a woman I loved but never truly knew. The journey to the house was a descent. I left the ordered grid of the city, the concrete and steel, for winding roads that became narrower, more aggressive, clinging to the mountainsides like desperate vines. The air grew thick with the scent of pine and damp, decaying earth, a smell both ancient and cloying. By the time I found the overgrown, barely there driveway, I felt as though I had driven not just miles, but back through time. The house itself was a creature of the woods, a two-story salt box structure of dark, weathered hemlock that seemed to absorb the dappled sunlight, giving nothing back. It sagged under the weight of time and secrets, its windows like vacant, watching eyes. The silence here was a physical entity, a heavy, suffocating blanket that swallowed the sound of my car door closing, leaving me feeling small and terribly exposed. The key was under a loose stone on the porch, just as the lawyer's note said. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the ghosts of long-dead fires, dust, and the faint, sweetish scent of lavender and rot. Furniture huddled under white shrouds, silent and patient. In the center of the dusty kitchen table, next to the heavy, old-fashioned iron key, was a single, folded sheet of yellowed parchment. The handwriting was an elegant, spidery script. The ink faded to a rusty brown. It was a list. 5 rules for survival. My first reaction was a wave of weary grief. My grandmother, the woman I'd never met, was clearly suffering from dementia before she died. The rules were a sad testament to a mind lost in paranoia. 1. Never answer the front door after midnight, no matter how loud the knocking gets. 2. Feed the stray black cat that appears on the porch every morning. Its hunger is not its own. 3. Never sleep in the same room 2 nights in a row. The house learns where you rest. 4. If you find teeth under your pillow, bury them immediately beneath the oldest tree in the yard. Do not keep them. 5. If you hear a lullaby from the basement, hum a different tune as loudly as you can and walk upstairs without looking back. Do not let it finish its song. I scoffed, a dry, humorless sound in the dead quiet of the house. It was absurd, the folklore of a troubled mind. I pocketed the note, my intention to clear out this sad, forgotten place and sell it as quickly as possible, solidifying into a firm resolve. That first night, I chose a small bedroom upstairs overlooking the dark, oppressive sea of trees. I didn't bother with the sheets, just threw my sleeping bag on top of a shrouded mattress. The house groaned and settled around me, the sounds of an old structure breathing. Or so I told myself. The profound isolation, the sheer distance from another living soul, began to work on my nerves. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside, sounded deliberate, personal. Exhausted from the drive and the emotional weight of the day, I eventually drifted into a restless sleep. Knock. I jolted awake, my heart hammering. The sound was not a creak. It was a single loud, deliberate knock on the heavy oak of the front door. It echoed through the silent house, a sound so solid and real it chased all thoughts of settling wood from my mind. I looked at my phone. 2:17 a.m. Knock. Knock. Louder this time. More insistent. I felt a primal urge to go down, to confront whoever was out there. But the first rule, as absurd as it was, echoed in my head. Never answer the front door after midnight. I lay there, frozen in the dark, my breath held tight in my chest, and listened as the knocking continued for what felt like an eternity. A brutal, relentless assault on the silence and my sanity. The knocking finally stopped just before dawn, not fading away, but ceasing abruptly, as if the person outside had simply vanished into thin air. I didn't sleep again. I sat in the dark, listening to the frantic pounding of my own heart, every nerve frayed raw. The city, with its constant anonymous noise, had never felt so safe, so far away. The absolute silence that reclaimed the house was somehow more menacing than the knocking had been. It was a watchful, waiting silence. When the first pale fingers of morning light finally pierced the gloom, I crept downstairs. I peered through the small, grimy peephole in the front door. Nothing, just the dew-soaked porch, the overgrown yard, and the endless, indifferent trees. There were no footprints in the damp earth, no sign that anyone had been there at all. But as I turned from the door, my eyes fell upon the floor. There, just inside, as if it had seeped through the wood itself, was a small, damp puddle of dark, brackish water and a single rotting black leaf that was not from any tree I recognized. Shaken, I made my way to the kitchen to brew a pot of coffee, my hands trembling. As I looked out the kitchen window, I saw him, a cat, a sleek, unusually large black cat with fur the color of midnight was sitting perfectly still on the back porch railing, staring at me. Its eyes were startling. One was a brilliant, piercing green, the other a milky, scarred over white. It was as if it were seeing me in two different worlds at once. Rule 2. Feed the stray black cat that appears on the porch every morning. Its hunger is not its own. On any other day, I would have ignored it. But after the knocking, after the puddle, the absurd rules were starting to feel less like ramblings and more like vital instructions. I found a can of tuna in the pantry, likely ancient, but probably fine for a stray. I opened it and placed it on the porch. The cat, which I instinctively named Patch, hopped down from the railing. It didn't devour the food greedily. It ate with a strange, deliberate delicacy. When it was finished, it looked not at me, but stared intently into the dark woods for a long moment, a low, almost inaudible growl rumbling in its chest. Then, with a flick of its tail, it vanished back into the tree line. Later that morning, as I was hauling shrouded furniture out onto the porch, a woman emerged from a path in the woods. She was in her late 60s, with a kind, wrinkled face and shrewd, intelligent eyes. "You must be Elias," she said, her voice warm with a thick Appalachian lilt. "I'm Agatha Klein. I live just through the trees. I was a friend of your grandmother's. I brought you a casserole." Agatha was a font of information and folksy charm. She told me stories about my grandmother, Eleanor, painting her as a powerful, reclusive woman, deeply connected to the old ways of the mountains. "She had her reasons for keeping your mother away, dear," Agatha said, her eyes filled with a sympathy that felt a little too practiced. "This house, it requires a certain kind of strength, a certain kind of blood." She subtly probed my intentions, her relief palpable when I told her I planned to sell. That night, utterly exhausted, I collapsed onto the bed in the same room I'd used the night before. I was asleep in moments. My dreams were a chaotic mess of knocking doors and my mother's sad, distant face. I was jolted awake by a sharp, stinging pain on my hand. Patch was on the bed beside me, his good green eye wide with alarm. He had extended a single claw and pricked my hand, just hard enough to wake me. Then he leaped from the bed and stood in the doorway, staring at me, letting out a low, guttural hiss. Rule 3. Never sleep in the same room. 2 nights in a row. The house learns where you rest. A cold dread washed over me. The house knew I was here. I grabbed my sleeping bag and stumbled out of the room, Patch leading the way to a different bedroom at the far end of the hall. As I passed the room I had just left, I glanced back for a fleeting second. In the deep shadows of the room's corner, I thought I saw a tall, thin shape, a silhouette of a man, darker than the surrounding darkness, standing where my bed was. I slammed the door to the new room and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning, I found my mother's old journal tucked away in a dusty bookshelf. My heart leaped, thinking I might finally get some answers, but it was a monument to her fear. Page after page had been systematically, violently ripped out. Only a single, tear-stained entry remained, dated a week before she died in the city, far from this place. It read, "The lullaby is a lie. It's not her voice. It's the house. The house remembers what we try to forget, and it uses our memories to make us forget what we are." The words from my mother's journal echoed in my mind, a cryptic warning that only deepened the mystery. What did the house remember? What was I supposed to be? The next few days passed in a haze of paranoid cleaning and uneasy sleep, each night spent in a different, dusty room. The knocking at midnight became a regular, terrifying ritual. I learned to ignore it, to stuff pillows over my head, but the sound still vibrated through the floorboards, a relentless summons. Patch was my constant, silent companion, his presence a small, furry anchor in the encroaching madness. Then came the morning that shattered the thin veil of my denial. I woke up with a strange, gritty feeling in my mouth, a taste of chalk, and something else. Something ancient. My first thought was that a filling had come loose. I ran my tongue over my teeth. All seemed fine. Then as I moved to get out of bed, my hand brushed against the pillow. Underneath it, my fingers closed around something small, hard, and horribly familiar. I drew it out into the gray morning light. It was a tooth, a human tooth, a molar, yellowed with age and with a long, dark root. It was not mine. Rule 4. If you find teeth under your pillow, bury them immediately beneath the oldest tree in the yard. Do not keep them. A wave of bile rose in my throat. This was not a dream. This was not my imagination. This was real. A physical object, a piece of a forgotten person, had been placed under my pillow while I slept. The house, or whatever was in it, had been in my room, inches from my face. My hands trembled as I wrapped the tooth in a handkerchief. I felt an insane, morbid urge to keep it, to analyze it, to treat it as a clue. But the rule was specific. Do not keep them. I went outside, my heart pounding. In the back of the yard, near the edge of the woods, stood a massive, gnarled oak tree, its branches like the arthritic fingers of a giant. It was ancient, a silent witness to whatever had transpired on this land for centuries. With a small garden trowel I found in a rotting shed, I dug a hole in the damp, root-choked earth. As I dropped the tooth in and covered it with soil, a strange thing happened. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and with it, a sudden, startling clarity. It was as if a low-grade fever I didn't even know I had just broken. A fog of confusion, a subtle sense of lost time that had been plaguing me since I arrived, lifted. Burying the tooth hadn't just disposed of an object. It had done something to my mind. It had grounded me. It had taken something back. The experience was a turning point. This was no longer just about settling an estate. This was about survival. I needed answers. I remembered finding an old invoice in a desk drawer for a burst pipe repair years ago, signed by a local handyman, Yona Fields. I found his number online and called him. When I told him where I was calling from, the silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. "The old Elias Monroe place," he finally said, his voice a low, nervous rumble. "Zon, you shouldn't be there." I pressed him, asking about the work he'd done. "It wasn't no burst pipe," he admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Your mother, she hired me to check the foundation in the basement. Said she heard noises. I went down there. The air, son. It ain't right. Cold. And the whole time, I heard this sound. A woman humming. A pretty tune, but sad. I thought it was your grandmother upstairs. He paused, and I heard him take a shaky breath. But as I was leaving, I looked back from the top of the stairs, and I saw it. I saw a shadow, a tall, thin shadow of a woman, walking up the stairs towards me, backwards. But the humming sound never moved. It stayed right there, at the bottom of the basement. I ran out of that house and never looked back. Some things are best left buried. Jonah's story sent a fresh wave of terror through me, but it also contained a clue. I began a meticulous search of the house, not as a cleaner, but as an archivist, looking for my family's hidden records. In the attic, tucked away inside a heavy, sea-worn trunk, I found them. Not just journals, but old reel-to-reel tapes. An player. I threaded the first tape, my hands shaking. The hiss of old magnetic tape filled the dusty air. And then, a woman's voice. My grandmother, Eleanor, clear and strong. She was documenting something. Log date 10.9/1978. The entity is active again. The knocking was violent last night. The lullaby has started. I believe it is testing the wards. The child, my daughter, she is too sensitive to it. I have to send her away. For her own good. It is my burden to bear alone. It is my burden to bear alone. The love and pain in her voice were a punch to the gut. My mother hadn't been abandoned. She had been saved. The recording continued. My grandmother humming a simple, pleasant counter melody. Her voice firm. This is the tune of binding, she explained. It must be stronger than its song. Suddenly her humming was cut off. There was a piercing scream, the sound of shattering glass, and then silence. The tape clicked and hissed, empty. That night, armed with the horrifying knowledge from the tape, I knew it was coming. The house felt like it was holding its breath, a coiled serpent waiting to strike. I sat in the living room, a fire roaring in the hearth, every light in the house blazing, clutching a heavy iron poker. It was almost 10 p.m. when it began. A melody, faint at first, then clearer, wafting up from the direction of the basement door. It was a lullaby, achingly beautiful, and filled with a profound, bone-deep sorrow. And it was the exact melody my mother used to hum to me when I was a small child. A half-remembered tune from the deepest, most cherished corners of my memory. It wasn't just a sound. It was a hook, baited with my own nostalgia, my own loss. The urge to go to it, to open the door, to find the source of that comforting, familiar sound was a physical pull, a deep, resonant need that brought tears to my eyes. Rule of 5. If you hear a lullaby from the basement, hum a different tune as loudly as you can and walk upstairs without looking back. Do not let it finish its song. My grandmother's voice from the tape echoed in my mind. This is the tune of binding. This is the tune of binding. It must be stronger than its song. I understood. It was a battle of wills, a battle of melodies. I stood up, my legs trembling. I opened my mouth, but my mind was blank. What tune? What could possibly be stronger than a song woven from my own memories? The lullaby from the basement grew stronger, more insistent, more beautiful. And then, a random, absurd memory surfaced. A stupid, catchy, infuriatingly simple pop song that had been all over the radio the week before I drove up here. I began to hum it, loudly, obnoxiously. My voice was wavering off-key, but I forced it out. My eyes squeezed shut. I focused on the simple, idiotic structure of the pop song, using its manufactured cheerfulness as a shield against the heartbreaking beauty of the lullaby. And I walked. I turned my back on the basement door and walked deliberately up the stairs, one step at a time, humming my ridiculous, defiant tune. The lullaby from below seemed to falter, to become discordant, as if confused by the competing sound. It grew more desperate, more pleading, trying to reclaim my attention. But I didn't look back. I reached the top of the stairs, slammed my bedroom door shut, and kept humming until my throat was raw. Eventually, the lullaby faded, defeated, into silence. The next day, exhausted but resolute, I began a new search. If this house was a prison, it had to have been built like one. I examined the foundation stones in the cellar, the heavy beams in the attic, and I found them. Carved deep into the wood and stone were repeating symbols, almost lost to age and grime. They weren't decorative. They were deliberate. I took detailed photographs of them, and remembering my search for local experts, I found the blog of a Dr. Ava Brenner, a cultural anthropologist at a nearby university, specializing in regional Native American folklore. I emailed her the photos with a vague story about researching an old family home. That afternoon, Agatha Klein visited again. She brought a freshly baked apple pie, her expression one of neighborly concern. "You look tired, dear," she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "The woods can be hard on a person not used to them. You have to find a way to soothe your soul." As she spoke, she began to hum a soft, gentle melody under her breath, as if lost in thought. My blood turned to ice. It was the lullaby, the beautiful, terrible, heartbreaking lullaby from the basement. She was humming it perfectly. The melody that drifted from Agatha Klein's lips was not a mindless hum. It was a key, turning a lock deep inside the house, and deep inside me. She hummed it with a casual, almost maternal air, but her eyes, those shrewd, ancient eyes, were fixed on my face, watching for a reaction. My blood went cold, a frigid tide pulling all the warmth from my body. The kindly neighbor, the bringer of casseroles, the gentle storyteller. It was all a mask, a meticulously crafted lie. The lullaby wasn't just a sound the house made. It was a tool, and she knew how to wield it. "That's a pretty tune," I said, my voice dangerously calm. I fought to keep my hands from shaking, to keep the dawning, monstrous truth from showing on my face. My mother used to sing it. Agatha's smile widened, but this time it held no warmth. It was a victor's smile. "Oh, I know, dear," she said, her folksy lilt hardening into something sharp and proprietary. I taught it to her, just as her mother taught it to me. It's a family song, you see. A song to call the lonely ones home. The pretense shattered, the veil of civility disintegrating between us. In that moment, I didn't see a kind old woman. I saw a predator who had been patiently studying its prey. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed violently in my pocket. It was an email from Ava Brenner. I tore my eyes away from Agatha, my thumb frantically swiping to open the message. It was a wall of text, written with the breathless urgency of a scholar who has just stumbled upon a terrible living truth. "Mr. Monroe," it began, "I don't know what house you are in, but you need to leave immediately. These are not decorations. This is a prison. The symbols you sent are a sophisticated form of Cherokee binding ritual, far older than the house itself. They are designed to contain a specific class of entity, what my ancestors called an un-na-hui, a dream eater or memory thief. It's a creature that doesn't consume flesh but identity. It lures its victims with fabricated memories of comfort and love, embodied in a sound, a song, the lullaby." My eyes flicked up to Agatha, who was watching me read, a look of smug amusement on her face. I continued reading, my heart a frantic drum. "The ritual requires a bloodline, a family to act as willing jailers, their presence and adherence to the rules, reinforcing the wards generation after generation. But the wards are failing. From what you described, someone is actively corrupting them. The lullaby is the entity's primary weapon. Anyone humming it nearby is either a victim whose mind is already under its control, or they are a willing accomplice, a caller, trying to curry favor with the prisoner." I looked up from the phone. Agatha was still smiling. "She's a clever girl, that one," she said, nodding towards my phone. "Her people were the ones who first found it here, but they lacked vision. They saw a prisoner. My family, the Kleins, who served your grandmother's family for generations. We saw a god. The truth slammed into me. She wasn't just a neighbor. She was a keeper of a darker flame, a resentful acolyte who had waited decades for her turn. You've been helping it, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. The knocking. The whispers. You're trying to set it free. Free? Agatha laughed, a dry, rasping sound. Oh no, dear boy. You don't set a god free. You make a bargain with. Your bloodline is strong, Elias, the strongest. It's what keeps the wards anchored. But you are an unwilling participant. I, on the other hand, am a true believer. The Crooning One promised my ancestors a gift, a way to shed the frailties of the flesh, to live beyond the decay of years. Your grandmother was too afraid to claim it. Your mother ran from it. But I have been patient. I have tended the garden, and now the fruit is ripe. As she spoke, the very atmosphere in the house began to shift. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The shadows in the corners of the room deepened, stretching and twisting into unnatural shapes. The faint, sweet smell of lavender and rot was replaced by the overpowering scent of damp earth and a deep, ancient cold. Outside, the woods fell silent. Not a bird, not an insect. The world was holding its breath. Agatha's humming had been an invitation, and the guest of honor was beginning to arrive. What do you want? I demanded, my hand gripping the iron poker from the fireplace. What your grandmother was too weak to give, Agatha said, her eyes beginning to glow with a faint predatory light. The house, the power, and your body, Elias, a new, strong vessel for a soul that has grown so very tired of its old, wrinkled prison. She was going to hijack the ritual. To possess me, the house came alive. It was no longer a passive container of dread. It was an active participant. The whispers started, not from one direction, but from all around me. A chorus of voices from my past. I heard my father, who died when I was 10, calling my name. I heard my college roommate laughing at a long-forgotten joke, and then, the most terrible voice of all, my sister. A voice I hadn't heard in 3 years. A memory the Crooning One could not possibly know, unless it had fabricated it, woven it from the fabric of my own grief. Help me, Eli, her voice whispered, seeming to come from the hallway. I'm so lost. I'm so cold. It was a lie. It had to be. But it was a perfect, beautiful, soul-tearing lie. My resolve wavered. I took a step towards the hallway, my heart aching with an impossible hope. A black streak shot through the room, a blur of fur and fury. Patch. He landed in front of me, his back arched, his fur standing on end, his good green eye blazing. He let out a savage, guttural hiss. Not at me, but at the empty hallway where my sister's voice had been. He was the guardian, the anchor to reality, his primal instinct untroubled by memories or lies. His fierce loyalty snapped me back from the brink. A filthy animal. Agatha spat, her face contorting in a mask of rage. An old fading ward. It will not save you. She began to chant, a low, guttural litany in a language I didn't recognize, her voice weaving a harmony with the ghostly whispers that now filled the house. The walls themselves seemed to groan, to warp. The floorboards buckled. I looked out the window and saw them, the hollow men, dozens of them, standing at the edge of the tree line, tall, thin figures of shadow, their faces blank, featureless voids, all turned towards the house. The entity was projecting its power, laying siege to my sanity. I knew then I couldn't stay here. I couldn't fight it in the house, where its power was absolute. I had to get to the source. The basement. My grandmother's last tape, the one that ended in a scream. I had found a second part to it, hidden in the lining of the trunk. On it, her voice, strained and gasping, described the final ward, the one failsafe if the keeper ever turned. a reset, a ritual that had to be performed at the Heartwood, the central foundation stone of the house, the very stone upon which the entity was bound. To re-establish the prison, the jailer had to willingly enter the cell. It was a trap, and it was my only hope. I grabbed the heavy iron poker, its familiar weight a small comfort. "Patch, with me," I commanded. I ran for the basement door, Agatha's chanting growing louder, more triumphant, behind me. She thought I was fleeing, that her victory was imminent. I threw the door open and plunged down the rickety wooden stairs, into the cold, waiting darkness below. The basement was a different world. The air was frigid, and the smell of damp earth was overwhelming. The humming my grandmother had described, the one Jonah Fields had heard, was here, a low, subsonic thrum that vibrated in my teeth. The lullaby started again, but it wasn't coming from one place. It was coming from the walls, from the floor, from the very air around me. It was the entity's true voice, beautiful and horrifying. Agatha appeared at the top of the stairs, her form silhouetted against the light from the floor above. "There is nowhere to run, Elias," she cried, her voice booming with borrowed power. "This is his heart, his throne room. Here you are nothing." In the center of the basement, directly beneath the main hearth of the house, was a single, massive, flat-topped stone, the Heartwood. It was covered in the same Cherokee symbols as the rest of the house, but here they glowed with a faint, sickly green light. This was the focus of the prison. As I approached it, the lullaby intensified, and the memories it conjured became almost physically real. I saw my mother, young and vibrant, humming me to sleep. I saw myself as a small boy, running through a field of wildflowers, comforting lies designed to disarm me, to make me lower my guard. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Agatha said, descending the stairs slowly, savoring her victory. "To be loved, to be remembered. He offers you peace, Elias. All you have to do is accept it. Sleep, and I will wake in your place." She began to chant again, her voice weaving into the lullaby. The green light on the stone altar pulsed, and a mist began to rise from it. A thick, cloying fog that smelled of pine needles and graveyards. The mist began to coalesce, to take a shape. A tall, thin, shadowy form, its outlines indistinct, its features lost in swirling vapor. The Crooning One, drawn from its slumber by its treacherous keeper. This was it, the climax of the ritual, the moment of transference. Agatha raised her hands, her eyes rolling back in her head. I gripped the poker, my knuckles white. Patch let out a low rumbling growl beside me. It was me, a terrified archivist with an iron stick and a cat, against a witch and her memory-eating god. The odds weren't good. But my grandmother had left me one final instruction on that tape, one final, desperate gambit, a way to turn the ritual against the keeper. It required a sacrifice, a memory, not a fabricated one, a real one, the most painful one I had. The air horn's blast had been a double-edged sword. It had shattered the immediate illusion of the phantom roadblock, but in its place, I had summoned an army. The highway behind me was no longer just a dark road. It was a moving tide of silent, grasping figures, a legion of bone collectors pouring from the woods, their numbers growing with every mile. They were no longer just loping. They were sprinting, a sea of disjointed stop-motion nightmares, their shadowy forms flowing over the asphalt like spilled ink. The hellhound, Cerba, was a blur of black fur and amber-eyed fury, weaving between them, a valiant but hopelessly overwhelmed guardian, trying to break up the pack, to give me precious seconds. Mara's voice on the radio was a torrent of triumphant, static-laced rage. "You see, Micah, you see the power of this road. They were all here, waiting, all the lonely souls, all the forgotten travelers. They just needed a proper invitation. You have rung the bell for your own feast." The highway itself was now her primary weapon. It bucked and twisted beneath me. Illusory exits appeared and vanished in my headlights. The ghosts of past accidents became almost solid. I had to swerve violently to avoid the shimmering, transparent wreckage of a 1970s station wagon. Seeing for a horrifying instant the pale, screaming faces of a family inside, the lines on the road writhed, attempting to braid themselves together, to guide me into the guardrail, into the dark, waiting trees. My knuckles were white on the wheel, my muscles burning with the strain of fighting a road that had become a living, malevolent entity. I remembered Hank's logbook, the hand-drawn maps. I'd spent hours staring at them back at the truck stop, trying to burn them into my memory. He had marked one section with a thick red X and a single scrawled word: Anchor. It was an old decommissioned stretch of the original U.S. Route 11, the pre-interstate highway that the I-95 had replaced. It ran parallel to the main highway for a few miles before hitting a dead end at a collapsed bridge over a deep ravine. Hank had written, "The old road remembers more." The connection is stronger there. I didn't know if he meant it was a trap or an opportunity, but I was out of options. The collectors were beginning to reach the trailer, their long, shadowy fingers scraping against the metal, a sound like dry leaves skittering across a tombstone. I saw the turnoff ahead, almost completely swallowed by the forest, just as Hank's map had shown. It wasn't an exit, it was a scar. With a prayer to a god I hadn't spoken to in years, I wrenched the wheel, leaving the relatively smooth asphalt of the interstate. The rig groaned in protest as we hit the old, cracked concrete of the original highway. The moment my tires touched the old road, the atmosphere changed. The cacophony of Marla's voice and the surrounding whispers intensified, the air growing thick and heavy. But the landscape grew quieter, more ancient, more sorrowful. This road was saturated with a deeper, older energy. I had left the main hunting ground and entered the lair. The road ended just as the map had predicted, at a sheer dead end. A massive, collapsed stone bridge lay in ruins, the ravine below a pit of absolute blackness. I slammed on the brakes, the rig jackknifing with a scream of tortured metal, the headlights illuminating the abyss. I was trapped. The army of bone collectors poured onto the old road behind me, their forms becoming clearer, more defined in this place of concentrated power. They slowed, their hungry, featureless gazes fixed on the humming container. Serba, the hellhound, skidded to a halt between me and the approaching horde. Its body braced, a low, guttural growl rumbling in its chest. It was making its last stand. Marla's voice filled the cab, no longer triumphant, but with a tone of imminent, ecstatic completion. End of the line, Micah. Perfect. You brought the offering directly to the altar. The static around her voice receded, and for a moment her voice was almost clear, almost human, filled with a desperate 2-decade-long hunger. Now perform the final delivery. Open the box. Let it feed on the energy of this place of so much sorrow. The offering will be immense. It will be enough to satisfy them. And finally, set me free. I looked at the humming container. The hungry box, Ruthie had called it. My salvation, Marla claimed, was to open it. But I remembered Hank's last frantic entry in his logbook. The container isn't the cargo. I am? I looked at the horde of collectors, their skeletal fingers twitching. I looked at the brave, doomed hellhound holding them at bay. And I looked at the abyss where the bridge used to be. The box wasn't meant to be opened here. It was a vessel. And Marla didn't want the energy of the place. She wanted the energy of a soul to open it. My soul, left alone, shaking and exhausted in the quiet dark. The immediate threat was over. Agatha was gone, but I was acutely, terrifyingly aware of my new reality. The ritual hadn't destroyed the entity. It had merely reset the clock, sated it with a new, powerful soul. I was not the owner of this house. I was its new, permanent jailer. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet, grim acceptance. The house was different. The oppressive, watchful silence had been replaced by a neutral, sleeping quiet. The midnight knocking ceased. The lullaby did not return, but I knew it was not gone. It was merely dormant, digesting its unexpected meal, its prison walls reinforced by Agatha's consumed soul. My role, the one my mother had fled from and my grandmother had borne, was now clear. I did not sell the house. To sell it would be to abandon my post, to unleash its prisoner upon an unsuspecting world. I became the warden of Hemlock House, my life now dictated by the 5 ancient rules. They were no longer a mystery. They were my sacred duty, a ritual of containment. Every morning, I fed Patch. The sleek black cat was no longer just a companion. He was my sentinel, my first line of defense, his senses attuned to the subtle shifts in the house mood. His purr was a sign of peace, his hiss a warning of a thinning veil. Every night, I slept in a different room, a nomadic existence within my own prison, never giving the house a chance to learn my scent, my habits, my dreams. Some mornings I would still find a tooth under my pillow, a sign that the entity was still brushing against my subconscious, tasting my memories in its sleep. And every time, I would perform the ritual, burying the tooth beneath the ancient, gnarled oak, grounding myself, reaffirming my identity against the thing that sought to unravel it. The house and I were locked in a cold, quiet, eternal war of attrition. I re-established contact with Ava Brenner. She became my only link to the outside world, a trusted ally in my lonely vigil. We spoke for hours on encrypted video calls, her academic knowledge and my inherited experiential wisdom combining to form a comprehensive picture of what we were dealing with. Together, we began the slow, painstaking work of trying to find a more permanent solution, scouring ancient texts and forgotten folklore for a counter-ritual, a way to banish or destroy the Crooning One for good. It was a monumental task, a search for a miracle that might not exist, a duty that I knew would likely consume the rest of my life. I found a strange, quiet peace in this new purpose. The restless, aimless grief that had defined my adult life was gone, replaced by a heavy but solid sense of responsibility. I was no longer running from my family's past. I was standing guard over it, honoring my grandmother's sacrifice and understanding. Finally, the true depth of my mother's love. She hadn't abandoned me. She had given me a lifetime of freedom, a gift I could only now appreciate as I lived out my sentence. One cold, late autumn evening, about a year into my tenure as warden, I was on a call with Ava. We were excited, discussing a newly translated Cherokee text that spoke of a song of unmaking, a melody that could supposedly unravel the Dream Eater's very existence. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of genuine hope. As we spoke, my gaze drifted to the window overlooking the long, dark driveway, and my blood ran cold. Headlights, 2 bright, piercing orbs, cutting through the darkness, moving slowly up the overgrown path. A car, a thing that had not happened in the entire year I had been here. My heart hammered against my ribs. Elias? Are you there? Ava's voice sounded distant, tinny. Someone's here, I whispered, my voice a stranger to my own ears. I watched as a dark sedan, sleek and out of place in these woods, pulled to a stop in front of the house. 2 figures got out, a young man and a young woman dressed in city clothes. They looked lost, confused, their faces illuminated by the porch light I never used, but which was, for some reason, now on. They looked up at the house, their expressions a mixture of awe and trepidation. Then, a sound that I had not heard in a year echoed through the quiet house. Knock. It was loud, sharp, demanding. It was just before midnight. The couple on the porch looked innocent, stranded travelers perhaps, their car having broken down on the remote mountain roads. A common enough story. They would ask to use the phone. They would ask for shelter. They would ask for kindness. I looked at Patch. He was not at the door, hissing. He was sitting by the fireplace, perfectly still, his good green eye fixed on me, his expression unreadable. He was leaving the choice entirely to me. I looked at the clock on the mantelpiece. The long minute hand was ticking, with agonizing slowness, towards the 12. The rules were my shield, my duty. They were what kept the world safe. But they were also a cage, not just for the monster, but for me, for my own humanity. To refuse them entry was to follow the rule. To offer help to strangers in the night was the most basic human impulse. The knocking came again, louder this time, more insistent, and I understood. The teeth, the whispers, the shifting rooms, they were just tests. The lullaby itself was not the most dangerous song. The true test, the oldest lure of all, was the simple, desperate sound of a human being asking for help in the dark. And I knew, with a chilling, absolute certainty, that the house was always, always hungry for a new song.